This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are cracking open a set of sources that, honestly made me feel a little foolish about how I've always understood European history. You know, the standard way we're taught this stuff, the genius model. You have a timeline, and suddenly a guy like Descartes or Newton just pops into existence, has a brilliant thought, and humanity levels up.
Right, the great man theory of history. It's a very, well, it's a comforting story.
It is, but the research we're looking at today suggests that's completely wrong. It paints a picture where philosophy isn't just a leisure activity for, guys in wigs.
No.
It argues that if you look at the timeline, you don't see random sparks of genius.
Yeah.
You see a survival map.
A geopolitical map, really. The central idea here is fascinating and, frankly, a little cynical. It's that these huge philosophical movements weren't just intellectual exercise.
They were national survival strategies.
Exactly.
And it solves this puzzle that has always kind of bothered me. Why the weird lag? Why does the scientific revolution explode in England in the 1600s? But then France spends the entire 1700s obsessed with political theory. And Germany, the Germans don't produce their heavy hitters, the Kants and Hegels, until the 1800s.
It's a very clear, staggered timeline. 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. 3 countries, 3 centuries, 3 very different projects.
So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack this 3-country model. We're going to look at how England used reason to conquer nature.
Then France used it to redesign society.
And this is the one that really twisted my brain, how Germany used reason to save God.
That last one's a bit of a curveball, I know. But when you see the logic behind it, the desperation, it makes a kind of perfect sense.
Okay, so let's start with piece number 1, England. The 17th century.
The scientific revolution, the Royal Society, all that.
Right. And usually we're told this happened in England because, well, no, they had better universities or something. But these sources point to something much more practical.
They point to the political situation.
And the fact that their politics were already sorted out.
Basically, yeah. To understand why Newton happens in England, you have to look at what wasn't happening. By the mid-1600s, they largely solved the who's in charge question. They had the Magna Carta way back in 1215.
Right. And the Glorious Revolution, later in 1688, they had effectively put a leash on their king.
Which is a massive contrast to the rest of Europe. While everyone else is fighting over absolute power, England has parliamentary sovereignty. They sort of decided, okay, the king works for us, and just moved on.
So the internal threat was neutralized.
Precisely. If you're an English intellectual in 1650, you don't have to spend all your time arguing about who sits on the throne. That's settled. So what do you do with all that brain power?
You look outward.
You look outward. And when they looked outward, they did not see friends.
No, they saw the Spanish Armada. They saw this massive Catholic empire trying to invade them.
And later, the Dutch trying to strangle their trade routes. You have to remember, England is an island. Its survival, its ability to eat, depended completely on the sea.
This is the part I loved. The sources argue that British philosophy, what we call empiricism, wasn't philosophy, it was navigation.
It was ballistics. Think about it. If you want to stop the Spanish Armada, you don't need a new theory of the soul. You need to know exactly how a cannonball flies through the air.
You need to know where the stars are so your ships don't crash into rocks.
Exactly. You need practical, measurable knowledge.
Okay, but let me just push back a bit. Isn't that a little reductive? Are we really saying Isaac Newton wrote the Principia just so the Navy could aim better? Surely there was some genuine curiosity there.
Oh, 100%. I'm not denying Newton's genius at all. But look at where the institutional support came from. The Royal Society wasn't just for fun. It was a strategic national asset. The state supported natural philosophy, what we call science, because understanding nature was a matter of national security.
Which creates a very specific kind of thinking. Empiricism.
Right. Empiricism is just the belief that truth comes from measuring stuff, from what you can see and touch. It's not about sitting in a chair thinking about essence. It's about poking the world and seeing what happens.
Because if they could master the physical world,
they could rule the waves, and they did. England becomes the dominant global power not because of its poetry, but because it focused its reason on technology, nature, and trade.
Okay, so that's Act 1. England gets the luxury of science because its house is in order. Now let's cross the channel. Act 2. France.
The 1700s, the Enlightenment.
This is that time lag. Why didn't France just copy England? If your neighbor invents calculus and gets super rich, wouldn't you just say, Okay, I'll do that too.
You'd think so. But France couldn't copy England because France had a completely different enemy. In England, the enemy was external Spain, the ocean.
In France, the enemy was inside the house.
The king, Louis XIV, the Sun King.
L'État, c'est moi.
I am the state. France was a suffocating absolute monarchy. The king controlled everything. The church controlled everything else.
So if you're a French intellectual, then a Voltaire or a Rousseau measuring falling apples is kind of useless.
It's worse than useless. It's a distraction. Measuring gravity doesn't get the boot off your neck. So frank reason had to be weaponized. It couldn't look at nature. It had to look at society and dismantle it.
This is such a great reframing. We usually just call them all philosophers, but the sources are arguing they were really inventing social science.
Yes. Look at Montesquieu. He's not writing about physics. He's looking at the British system and literally drafting a blueprint for a new kind of government, the separation of powers.
He's drawing the schematics for a democracy, not a steam engine.
Exactly. Or Rousseau. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. That's not metaphysics. That's a political manifesto.
It's a call to arms. And what about the encyclopedia?
By Diderot, yeah. Today we think of it like Wikipedia, just a book of facts. But at the time, it was an incredibly radical act. It was an attempt to break the monopoly on truth held by the king and the church.
It was saying knowledge belongs to the people.
Not to the crown. So while England is building telescopes to see the stars, France is building the intellectual guillotines to clear the court.
Which eventually became literal guillotines. The French Revolution.
It explodes in 1789. They used reason to redesign society from the ground up. The tool changes based on the job that needs to be done.
Which brings us to player number 3, the late arrival.
Germany. Poor Germany.
The sources really do paint a picture of Germany in the 18th century as a mess.
It was. We forget this because Germany is such a powerhouse now. But back then, it wasn't a country. It was the Holy Roman Empire, which, you know the joke.
It was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire.
Right. It was a patchwork. Over 300 little fragmented states. No central capital, no unified army, just chaos.
So if you're a German thinker then, like a Kant or a Hegel, you look at England with its navy and its science, you look at France with its revolution, and you look at home and you just see fragmentation.
Yeah, you see fragmentation. But you do see one thing that binds everyone together, Lutheranism. The only thing that made a Prussian feel connected to a Saxon was their shared Protestant identity. It was the only glue they had.
But that created a new crisis, didn't it? By the late 1700s, traditional religion was starting to look a bit old-fashioned.
Rustic is the word one source used. I think that's putting it kindly.
Right. Compare that to the shiny, razor-sharp science from England or the political theory from Paris. German theology just looked weak.
They had a huge inferiority complex, and this is the aha moment for German idealism. The sources argue that this super dense German philosophy, it wasn't just abstract thinking, it was a rescue mission.
A rescue mission for God.
For God, and by extension for the German soul. They had to upgrade their theology so it could compete. They couldn't just say, have faith. They had to prove that faith was actually the highest form of reason.
Okay, help me here, because I've tried to read Kant. It is dense. How does writing unreadable books save religion?
It's a brilliant defensive move. So Kant looks at British science, this idea that we only know what we can measure. And instead of fighting it, he puts a fence around it.
He gives it its own territory.
He says, okay, science, you're great. You can explain the phenomena, the world of things we can see and touch. You can have the rocks and the stars.
Go ahead.
But, he says, there is another world, the noumena, the ultimate reality. And science simply cannot touch that. It's physically impossible.
He carved out a safe space for God.
Exactly. He used reason to draw a boundary around reason. And then Hegel comes along later and basically equates the state, the unified German state that didn't exist yet, with the divine.
Which makes the state holy.
And it makes philosophy the high priest of that holiness. In England, philosophy was a hobby. In France, a weapon. But in Germany, philosophy became a substitute for politics.
Because they couldn't build a nation on a map.
So they built it in their minds first. They literally thought the German nation into existence.
This reminds me of the Japan connection in the sources.
Yeah.
Japan had a similar late-to-the-party panic.
A perfect parallel. The Kyoto School. Japan opens up, sees Western military and science, and feels threatened. They worry they'll lose their Japanese spirit.
So they didn't copy the British?
No, they went straight for the Germans. They imported German idealism because it was a tool designed for that exact problem. How do I modernize without losing my soul? Philosophy as a shield.
Which brings us to the most provocative idea in all this research, the defense mechanism theory of philosophy.
This is the part that might upset some philosophers listening.
Go on.
The theory is this. Philosophy is not a primary discipline, it's a secondary one, it's a bodyguard. It only shows up when theology or meaning is under attack.
So if things are going well, you don't need it.
Look at the pattern. In England, natural science is working. You don't need metaphysics, you just measure things. In France, social science is working, you just pass laws.
You only need philosophy when you need to defend meaning against a superior intellectual enemy.
Exactly. And the source goes all the way back to Thomas Aquinas to prove it.
The heavyweight of Catholic theology.
Why did he write the Summa Theologica? Not for fun. He wrote it because the Catholic Church was getting absolutely hammered by Islamic philosophy.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought he was just organizing doctrine.
Not at all. In the 12th and 13th centuries, Islamic thinkers like Avicenna and Averroes had preserved Aristotle. They had these incredibly logical systems. Compared to them, Christian theology looked, well, superstitious.
So Aquinas wasn't just exploring God's nature.
He was building a defense system. He took Aristotle's logic, the enemy's weapon, and welded it to Christian faith. He built a fortress of reason to protect belief.
That's a wild way to see it. Philosophy isn't a search for truth, it's a search for armor.
Or a weapon. When the enemy gets too strong, theology hires philosophy to fight back.
But that raises a huge question for us today. Theology isn't the center of the state anymore.
No. In the West, it's mostly retreated into private life. It's counseling, spiritual care.
And natural science and social science, they won. They run the world now. They don't need philosophy to explain things.
The physicist doesn't ask the philosopher how gravity works.
So, is philosophy dead? If the bodyguard has no one left to protect, is he out of a job?
You'd think so. But the sources argue for a pivot, a return to the beginning.
To Socrates.
To Socrates. Think about what he actually did. He didn't build a massive system. He didn't invent calculus. He just walked around and asked annoyingly good questions.
What is justice? What is virtue?
He was a traffic controller. And the sources argued this is the new, vital role for philosophy.
Traffic control. That sounds a bit less grand than defender of the divine.
I don't think so. I think it's more important. Look at our world. AI developers sprinting ahead, bioengineers editing genes, politicians arguing economics, they're all in their own lanes.
Driving really, really fast.
And they're about to crash at the intersection. The AI guy doesn't understand the bioethics guy. Philosophy isn't the engine anymore. Science is. Philosophy isn't the driver. Politics is. But philosophy can design the intersection.
Concept engineering.
Exactly. A self-driving car has to make a choice in an accident. That's the trolley problem. That's not a math question. It's a philosophy question.
Or gene editing. Just because we can eliminate a disease, should we?
Precisely. The scientist tells you how. A philosophical dialogue helps you figure out if you should.
So the philosopher becomes a mediator, like Michael Sandel's justice lectures.
Yes. Sandel isn't giving you the answer. He's facilitating a space where people with conflicting values can talk. He's asking the questions that force everyone to speak the same language.
The sources use a great analogy. They call these dialogue groups Little League Baseball for society.
I loved that. It's so accurate.
It's like we've forgotten how to disagree constructively, so we need these practice grounds to relearn the fundamental skill of the 21st century. Asking the right question.
It's mental training, because in a world drowning in information, framing the problem is more valuable than just spitting out an answer. AI can give you answers. Philosophy teaches you how to write the prompt.
From the king of sciences to the crisis manager.
A humble role, but maybe the only one that keeps the whole thing from flying apart.
So let's bring this all home. We started with the puzzle about dates.
The time lag.
England in the 1600s. Turning outward to conquer nature with science.
France in the 1700s, turning inward to conquer society with revolution.
And Germany in the 1800s, turning upward to save theology with idealism.
Distinct strategies for distinct national problems.
And the big takeaway is that philosophy is a tool. It's the shield we raise when the world gets too scary or too confusing.
And today, the world is confusing in a new way because of its sheer complexity.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to think about. We usually think of being smart as having all the answers, but this deep dive suggests history is shaped by people who knew what kind of problem they were trying to solve.
England knew it was a navigation problem. France knew it was a political problem. Germany knew it was a unity problem.
So here is the question. What is the problem we are trying to solve right now? Are we conquering nature? Redesigning society? or finding a new spirit.
Or maybe we're just trying to keep the traffic moving without a crash.
And in a world full of noise, maybe the most powerful thing you can do isn't to shout an answer, but to ask a better question.
Socrates would agree with that.
Thanks for diving in with us.
See you next time.
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.